All right, so you want to know more about how Denmark's relationship with Africa is changing, right?
Yeah, you sent us some really interesting stuff.
Yeah, we've got this new Danish strategy document and a
Uh-huh.
press release, too.
Okay.
So let's unpack it. Let's do a deep dive and see what we can learn about this. This is a hot topic.
It really is. And what strikes me right away is how this document, it doesn't beat around the bush.
Yeah.
It gets straight to the point.
What do you mean?
Well, it comes right out and says, look, there's this major global shift happening, and then it immediately positions Denmark right in the middle of it.
You're right. It jumps right in. I mean, one of the first things I noticed was that stat, by 2050, 1 in 4 people on the planet will be
Yeah.
African.
It's huge, yeah.
That's huge.
It's a demographic youthquake, is
Sure.
what they're calling it. And it has major implications. It's not just about a growing population, it's about a massive generation, like coming of age, entering their prime working years. Think about the impact on everything.
Mm.
Consumer markets, global innovation. It's a game changer. And honestly, I think it explains why Denmark is so focused on building these relationships right now.
It's like they're getting ahead of the curve,
Yeah.
recognizing that Africa is going to have more and more influence on the world stage.
Exactly. And the strategy is very clear on that point. Africa is not a monolith.
Yeah.
This is not a one-size-fits-all situation.
Right.
It's 54 distinct countries, each with its own government, its own unique set of challenges, its own opportunities.
Yeah. It makes you realize how important it is to move beyond those old stereotypes, those one-size-fits-all approaches.
Absolutely. And I think the strategy gets that.
Right.
It really emphasizes the need for this nuanced engagement that recognizes the agency, the individual priorities of each nation. There's a really interesting dynamic at play, too.
Okay.
The document is very clear. Denmark and the EU, they want to be the partners of choice for African nations.
Right.
But they're facing competition, stiff competition.
Yeah.
China, for one,
Right.
and Russia. They've been making huge investments in the region.
So it's not just about aid and development anymore.
Nope.
It's about trade, investment, security partnerships. It's about, like, who's going to be the major player in Africa's future.
It really is. It's this fascinating geopolitical chess match playing out. And honestly, it'll be very interesting to see how this competition shapes the future of international relations.
It sounds like the stakes are getting pretty high.
They are.
And Denmark's not messing around.
No, they're not. They're putting their money where their mouth is, like you said.
Mm.
And I think one of the most concrete signs of that is this decision to increase their diplomatic presence in Africa.
Yeah. They're opening up embassies, right? I remember reading about that in Tunisia,
Yep.
Senegal, and Rwanda.
Exactly. Those are the new ones. But here's what I find really interesting.
Okay.
They're also closing some embassies.
Oh, really? Where?
Mali and Burkina Faso.
Huh.
And the reason they give is really important, I think. They specifically cite the recent military coups in both of those countries
Right.
and say, basically, it's limiting their ability to engage constructively in those contexts.
It's a strong message, though, isn't it? It's like they're saying, look, we want to work with you, but we also have standards.
Totally. It's a fascinating balancing act.
Yeah.
Sending that clear message, but also trying to keep those lines of communication open, maintain some kind of relationship.
Yeah, definitely. And speaking of relationships, there's this phrase that they use in the strategy document that I thought was really interesting. They kept talking about green strategic partnerships.
Oh, yeah.
What exactly do they mean by that?
Well, it seems to point to a strong emphasis on things like renewable energy,
Okay.
climate change, sustainable development, all that. And it makes sense, right? Because this is where Denmark really shines globally.
Oh, wait. They're known for that.
World-leading wind energy.
Windmills. Yeah, exactly. Innovative approaches to water management. They have a lot to offer in this space, and they clearly see this as an opportunity to leverage that expertise in Africa.
So it's not just about sharing knowledge, though. I mean, it sounds like it's also about finding opportunities for Danish businesses, right? To kind of get in on these growing sectors in Africa.
Absolutely. And to be fair, they're not just talking about it. They're actually putting things in place to make it happen, to encourage investment. For one thing, they're streamlining things, making it easier and cheaper for Danish businesses to get expert advice on African markets.
Oh, interesting.
They're also creating these new financial tools, ways to support companies that want to invest in these markets, especially, they say, in higher-risk countries. It's interesting, though, because any kind of investment obviously comes with some risks. I mean, are they acknowledging that at all? Are there challenges that they're outlining in this strategy?
Yeah, they definitely don't shy away from the reality on the ground. I mean, they specifically talk about the security challenges.
Which are?
Well, terrorism, For one, armed conflict in several regions and the rise of authoritarianism in some areas.
Hmm.
These are big, complex issues.
Yeah.
No easy solutions.
Yeah, definitely not. And it makes you wonder, how does Denmark, a country with its own history of colonialism, how do they approach these issues without it feeling like they're imposing
Right,
solutions?
right. And I think that's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
To their credit, the strategy really emphasizes this idea of respecting African leadership
Hmm.
and promoting what they call African solutions for African problems. It's not about coming in with all the answers. It's about empowering African nations to take the lead.
So more of a collaborative approach, not a dictatorial one.
Exactly. Working with, not dictating to.
Yeah.
And there are other challenges, too. One that I found really interesting was this whole issue of disinformation.
Disinformation, how so?
Well, they actually call out Russia specifically
Oh, wow.
for spreading disinformation campaigns within Africa, often targeting, they say, vulnerable populations through social media, trying to, sow discord, undermine democratic institutions.
It's almost like a whole other dimension of this, isn't it? This
Mhm.
information warfare.
Yeah, and you got to remember, internet access is exploding in Africa right now.
Mm.
So social media is incredibly powerful. But it also makes these populations incredibly vulnerable to manipulation.
It's like this whole digital battleground.
Exactly.
Mm.
And the strategy recognizes that. They say they need to find ways to counter these narratives. How they're going to do it, that's the big question.
Yeah, it's kind of scary when you think about it,
Mm.
how these disinformation campaigns can take advantage of like existing tensions.
Oh, yeah.
Vulnerabilities.
Like
It's like
that.
a whole new side of global politics.
It really is. And speaking of huge global challenges, this strategy puts a lot of focus on climate change.
Okay.
Denmark's pledging a ton of money, over 1 billion Danish kroner, to support water initiatives in Africa.
Well, that makes sense, right? I mean, Denmark is known for that.
Right.
Their expertise in water management, water technology.
Yeah, they're a global leader in that area.
It feels very strategic. Like
Right.
they're taking something they're really good at and using it to address this global issue that affects everyone.
Totally. They're bringing something to the table.
Mhm.
It's not just talk. And of course, you can't talk about Africa and Europe without talking about
Oh, here we go.
migration.
That elephant in the
Yeah.
room.
Right.
It's such a tough topic because it gets so politicized
It does.
and oversimplified in the media all the time.
Yeah, absolutely.
So how does this strategy even begin to approach something so complicated?
Well, they're definitely walking a tightrope here.
Oh.
On the one hand, they talk about reducing irregular migration, which is a big priority for a lot of European nations.
Sure.
But they're also saying they want to support African nations,
Yeah.
right? Helping them manage their own borders more effectively. And here's the key, I think. Addressing the root causes of displacement.
So looking beyond just border control and saying, why are people leaving their homes in the first place?
Exactly.
Things like poverty, conflict, lack of opportunity.
All of that, it's a much more holistic approach, right?
Right.
Recognizing that security and development, they're linked.
They go hand in hand.
Yeah. And they even hint at, expanding pathways for legal migration, which I thought
Yeah.
was really interesting.
Oh, how so?
Well, it's like they're saying, look, if we can make it easier for people to come to Europe legally, then maybe they won't risk their lives on these dangerous journeys.
Right. It gives them a safer alternative.
Exactly.
It's about finding a balance, right?
Yeah.
Between addressing those concerns about irregular migration, which are real concerns,
Mhm.
but also being more humane about it.
Yeah, more sustainable, too.
Absolutely. And you know what I appreciate about this strategy? It's not all just government stuff, policies and numbers.
Right.
They also talk about the importance of people-to-people connections, cultural exchange. I love that.
It's really important.
Yeah.
It's easy to forget about that when you're talking about international relations.
Totally.
But those connections, those are what build real understanding.
Absolutely. So what are they doing to actually make that happen?
Well, they're putting money towards it, for one thing. 50 million kroners every year to support cultural initiatives in Africa.
Specific examples.
One that stood out to me was this project to renovate the Karen Blixen House in Nairobi.
Oh, wow. That's amazing.
Yeah, that'll get some attention.
For those who don't know, Karen Blixen was the Danish author who wrote Out of Africa.
Right, about her life in Kenya.
That's a really powerful symbol, I think.
It really is. And beyond that, they're trying to get more African students to study in Denmark.
Oh, through like scholarships and exchange programs.
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
smart. Build those connections early on.
It's a much more personal kind of diplomacy, isn't it?
Yeah, it really
So
is.
it seems like Denmark is making a real effort here to, like, redefine its relationship with Africa for the 21st century.
Yeah.
It's ambitious. Do you think it'll work? I mean, could this be a model for other European nations?
Well, I think it's definitely a serious attempt to deal with, like, the realities of a changing Africa.
Yeah.
It's not perfect, but at least they're trying,
Yes.
and the fact that they're emphasizing partnership, really listening to African voices, that's huge. Only time will tell if it'll work. It'll be really interesting to see how China and Russia respond to all this,
Right.
because they're not just going to sit back and watch.
No, definitely not.
This is going to have ripples. How it all shakes out, who knows? But one thing's for sure, Africa is a major player on the world stage now, and it's only going to become more important in the future.
And those who don't realize that are going to get left behind.
Exactly. And I think this strategy from Denmark, it shows they understand that. What happens next? Well, I guess we'll have to wait and see.
It's in a new chapter, that's for sure.
It is.
Yeah.
It's a new chapter.
Yeah. And on that note, we're going to have to wrap it up for today.
Okay.
But this is a conversation that's going to keep going, I think. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive. I'm really curious to see what develops in the coming years as this new strategy plays out. It's going to be fascinating.